Thank you very much and welcome everyone to this session on the impact of prenatal or birth trauma across the lifespan. In brief, or to put the highlights, prenatal and birth trauma embraces all gestated and born, we are among them, parents and society. The theme does not restrict only to mothers, but fathers are important. The unborn child is a sentient being, and there are longer than 100 years that psychoanalysis pioneers have been speaking about it, and current research provides evidence. You can see here a selection of books already published. Most of the times I start speaking to people I meet in my clinic, and I ask them, was there anything going on around the time of the gestation, birth? And they usually may say, no, not really, because actually all of these traumas, the different traumas which we will present in a minute, are integrated, and so they seem normal and not making any difference. So when we speak about the pre-perinatal trauma, we speak about the trauma that is we are exposed during the period from before conception, because we have the ovulation period, the gametes, and all the other traumas that follow below, and the birth during gestation, birth, preconception, conception, gestation, and the birth. Now, in the meaning of trauma, the trauma can be either real or imagined, an imagined phenomenon, not because of the reality of the harm that was inflicted or the sadness which may make it fall into the category of a shock, but because these experiences are believed to have harmful influences on the identity, as Alexander said. So it is not only an event, a real event that causes a trauma, but also an event which is perceived as traumatic. So that's why we thought in the trigger, the period, we examine the period before, during, and after, and it could be either an acute trauma, single experience, or chronic, repeated and prolonged, or complex, because it has multiple traumatic events happening at the same time. No matter what it is, this pre-perinatal trauma or trauma generally is part of our everyday experience. The intergenerational trauma, now, to make it a little bit of clarification, refers to the trauma that causes epigenetic changes that occur due to a direct exposure to an environmental stressor, direct exposure, while the transgenerational is the trauma experienced as an exposure indirectly, because it affects the gametes. For example, you can see it here. Suppose that generation F0 mother is affected by a trauma, whatever, then all this information goes to the fetus. We know that the fetus, if it's a girl, up to the 4th month of gestation, has got all the ova she's going to use in her life. So it affects the generation F1 and F2 directly. Then F1, F2 generation will be the intergenerational inheritance and will transmit the trauma to F3 generation. while from the part of the father, because the father, let's say father zero generation, all of this information will go to the sperm, and the child that will come out of this father will be exposed directly, so that will be the intergenerational inheritance, and it will be transmitted to generations F2 and F3 as a transgenerational inheritance, which means that all of this, warfare, discrimination, revenge, cleansing, etc., all of this affects the present people, the present generation children, the children in the womb, and the generations afterwards. So, who is affected now? As you can understand, all people are affected. The prenate, the born child, the parents, the extended family, included the born siblings, and of course, the society. So, speaking about the stress impact on the prenate, the degree of traumatization, the psychoemotional state, our perception of ourselves, others, and the environment, the kinds of life strategies and tactics that we choose, and the relationships we form are all influenced by how we interpret the lived experience. Our health and the quality of life we ultimately have depends on the decisions we make based on our interpretations. So depending on how much intelligence there is in the system, the interpretations may be positive, creative, or toxic and destructive. Now, focusing on the maternal stress, well, as we will see, there is a lot of impact that the mother's stress may have on the children. And we'll start with the fetal brain. You know that when we start in the very early stages of our creation, most cerebral cortexes consist of 6 layers, and the development of the brain starts with the deepest layer, then going on to the next and the next, more superficial. During the time of migration, if there is a very stressful experience for the mother, then this will create a kind of chaos in the life of, in the experience of in the intrauterine organism, and something like a traffic jam. Then the migrating cells that follow and have to go or use the cortical ladder may not be able to do it properly, and this will result into miswiring brain, which will have very bad effects later on. The cerebellum is also affected. We know that the cerebellum is not only responsible for the movement, but it also examines the thoughts of the organism, smoothens, corrects, refines them. So what happens if there is a stressful experience in the environment? Well, the stress inhibits the production of oxytocin. So we know what oxytocin does, and at the same time it increases the production of vasopressin, which is associated with more violent and hostile behaviors. As a result, the prenatal or the infant later on does not benefit from the combination of a reduction in oxytocin and an increase in vasopressin, and as a result, males tend to become feminized, females tend to become masculinized. Then the inhibition of the prefrontal cortex, it leads to instinctive responses over more sophisticated intellectual activities, which means the decisions we make do not have that much intelligence. And certainly we have seen that stressful events associated with the cerebellum may increase congenital deformity, are associated with a cleft lip, cleft palate, spina bifida, and unfortunately, we also have the findings that associate this with schizophrenia and heavy psychopathology. Then another kind of stress from the part of the mother is the viral infection or psychological stress, malnutrition, the prenatal maternal immune activation in the very early stages, which all are associated with behavioral abnormalities in the exposed offspring, associated with, especially if they happen in the first trimester, with schizophrenia, psychosis, but also sensory motor gating, information processing, cognition, social function, etc. So the offspring later on present brain patterns and sensitivities which are not of the best, healthiest quality. We also know that the maternal stress is associated with the loss of neurons and synapses, and that the influence this stress has on the hippocampus and the amygdala is connected with our memory, which in such cases becomes dysfunctional. And it also affects our internal states, for example, sleep and eating. It decreases the capacity to learn. We have fewer dendrites, and also the corticosteroid receptors in the brain are decreased, which means that the child becomes sensitive to stress and harder to cope with it. The serotonin levels fall. As a result, we have a tendency to depression. We also have a problem, an influence of the brain weight, which diminishes the autonomic nervous systems. Also becomes overcharged. This means that we become nervous, irritable later on, and we develop personality traits that make relationships not that easy. And certainly it is associated with stress. The stress is associated with immune and inflammatory responses, maybe associated with autoimmune challenges, and finally it hastens the death of cerebellar neurons. We can see here, whenever you have the time, how these charts show. What could be the psychological distress? It could be anything, but some of the biggest ones are loss and bereavement, rejection of the pregnancy or not wanting it exactly at that time, a natural disaster, war, acts of violence. And these strong experiences have been associated in the worst scenarios for the children born. You see here about the viral infection, and besides all the other kinds of viruses that were known, and now we had the COVID-19 virus. All viruses have been connected with a bad impact on the prenatal and later on, because it affects the fetal brain development, it affects the immune system. You can see in the picture how this happens. The theme of the malnutrition, or what we call the mismatch concept and the thrifty hypothesis, has also been sufficiently researched. The Dutch famine is a good example of a mismatch concept, while the Leningrad siege is an example of match concept, if we could say that. The mismatch concept is when the intrauterine environment does not match well or at all with the extrauterine environment. And of course, these experiments, this research was done during the Dutch famine in the Second World War, which was followed by an experience of abundance after birth, after the Second World War. While in the Leningrad siege, the intrauterine environment and the extrauterine environment did not have many differences. But it does not restrict to only this malnutrition experience, because it affects everything else. All mismatches, the intrauterine and the extrauterine environments do not match or match. So the problems, most of the problems arise when there is a mismatch. Because then the organism has developed mechanisms to adapt to the intrauterine environment, but then continues to use the same strategies and behaviors, but the environment is different, so there is kind of problem here. Now we have a lot of evidence about the connection of cancer and prenatal experience, and there are a lot of papers now published connecting the cancer with the implantation period. You see, the implantation period is a very significant moment in our life, as if the placenta fails to protect the fetus against the embryo or pre-embryonic stage, against the maternal immunity due to incompatibility, not only rhesus factor incompatibility, a more general incompatibility, then in these cases the cells present the same behavior as the one which we notice in cancer. Now we know that all malignancies have a prenatal origin, whether they develop from an embryonal cell directly or from a more developed prenatal cell that has developed the pathological traits which aid in postnatal survival. We have examined, and we know which groups of mothers also have are more threatened by breast cancer or a malignancy like that, malignant tumors like that. You can see them here. Dizygotic pregnancies, macrosomic births, etc. So, in the fetal origins of adult disease, we also have seen that there is a number of diseases which are connected with prenatal experience. And this is diabetes, obesity, dyslipidemia, hypertension, coronary artery disease, stroke, kidney failures, liver failures, lung abnormalities, immune dysfunction, reduced bone mass, Alzheimer, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and cancer. You will see here, this is another interesting slide for you to look at. And here we see a lot of evidences now published about preterm birth and later health, and you can see that it is associated with so many different health issues. And although we have done something towards the maternal stress, we haven't done enough about the father's stress, the paternal stress. And it is surprising that what we believed that did not matter that much seems to be very much important. The birth of a new human being does not depend only on the maternal stress or on the mother, and it's not the mother's issue. It is associated with the paternal stress as well, and it is a parental issue. Think of what is going on with all of these fathers that survived the Holocaust, or all of these traumata that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. What else we know now is that the paternal stress affects mothers, and then it becomes maternal stress. That alcohol, cocaine, cigarette use during pregnancy, passive or active, can affect the child's ability to grow structurally and functionally, which frequently results in physical or mental disabilities. How many fathers do not make use of all of this? Then the father's obesity can affect the fetal growth parameters and the placental development, which can impact pregnancy outcomes, and then the impact is on the baby in gestation, then born. We also know, we have research data about the sick sperm hypothesis, which suggests that stress exposure can alter sperm maturation or motility, and that offspring development may be affected by the integrity of fertilization or pre-implantation events. Then all of this environmental information, neuroanatomical, behavioral, epigenetic, whatever it is, can be inherited transgenerationally or intergenerationally, as we have shown. So this means that parents not only transmit the behavioral cues about for example, fear and anxiety to their children, but also altered brain chemistry, known as a transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. So can you imagine now a father who has phobias, mental problems, fears, has survived a war or has been involved in that? What will happen to the offsprings? Unfortunately, we are still involved in wars and conflicts. Then we also have research data about the offspring of defeated fathers who show greater levels of several depressive and anxiety-like behaviors, both in males and females, and that men's sperm quality and fertility has been reported to be negatively correlated with low levels of these factors in cases of stress, and also that the behavioral and metabolic symptomatology can manifest in the next at least 2 generations. So let's look at our parents and do something really serious about the health of the males. Another thing is the telomeres we have studied. And you know, the telomeres are the endings of a chromosome. And you know that at each time a cell divides, the telomere loses a small amount of DNA and becomes shorter. So over time, this is getting smaller and smaller, and finally the cell dies. What have we seen from the research on stress and the telomeres? That telomeres get shorter when witnessing violence, and the ages 5 to 15 children have a higher likelihood of experiencing cellular aging. And it is the telomere length is reduced by roughly 16% as a result of father loss between the ages of 9 and birth. The impact is greater for children whose fathers pass away. And we see that the telomere in early life is the main determinant of inter-individual differences in telomere throughout the human life course. So it is associated with longevity, age-related disease, etc. Newborns with reduced telomere already exhibit more DNA damage than those with longer telomeres. Now, can we do anything to heal? You can see here in the image the birth mask. Looking at the face of a newborn, we can see all the trauma that has been, this baby has been exposed to. We need to do work on the body, on the cellular level, and prenatal psychotherapy, and on the psychomental level, cleansing the impact of trauma, starting with the generation now living, which is grandparents, and on the collective level, learning from our history, restore the broken trust, establish peaceful collaboration, respectful coexistence, because our past determines our present and the trends for our future. And it is not enough to have an individual healing support service, but it has to be done in among school children at schools, adolescents, young adults, families, mature adults, everybody from the moment of birth later on. So finishing, human health starts preconception, maternal and paternal stress impact the future generations. Psychotherapeutic work needs to integrate the analysis of all traumata. Professionals need to integrate the pre-perinatal human experience in their practices. Health professionals need better and wider academic and professional education embracing this. We need new policies. We need to take action to heal global stress. And of course, more research needs to be done. So thank you very much for your attention, and excuse the speed of my talk. So thank you.